Blood of the Romans. Chapter 1. The vapor of death hung in the air. Flames painted the sky in shades of blood. Teutones, Germanic warriors with wolf pelts on their heads, spread terror and horror across the land. And wherever their feet trod, only death and sorrow remained. Orytrix, son of the Nemeranti tribe's chieftain, stood desperately at the edge of the so-called bewitched grove. He was of relatively tall stature with long black hair. Unlike many men of his tribe, his hair was neither braided nor adorned with bones, as had been the custom especially in previous times. He wore a tunic of coarsely woven woolen cloth and trousers with carefully embroidered Celtic ornaments. On his feet, he wore high leather boots meticulously bound with straps. On his belt hung his sword that was passed from father to son for generations. In his hand, he gripped the hilt of the sword so tightly that his hand trembled. Wind rhythmically moved his round-painted shield by the saddle, as if the very weather of this land was nervous. His people were dying and suffering. He knew that if he did nothing, his tribe would perish and he would bring shame upon his ancestors. The forest he was about to enter was no ordinary one. The elders whispered of the woods, where trees grew from the bodies of dead gods. Among the druids, it was rumored that men who ventured into the forest willingly often returned with their will twisted, or did not return at all. But he had no choice. He gestured to his horse to walk forward. Hours passed, and so far, Orytrix found nothing cursed about the enchanted forest. He was beginning to feel that the only thing he had achieved was a waste of time, and it was meant to get even worse. He heard rustling in the fallen leaves. Wolves. He didn't need to see them to be certain of their presence. They circled around him from a safe distance, which was shortening with every second. With a grim mood, he dismounted, removed the round shield from saddle, and drew his sword. The wolf that Orytrix was watching crouched for a second, as if assessing the situation. Then it sprang and lunged toward him. The wolves around did the same. The first wolf was almost upon him and bloodthirstily leaped at Orytrix. He reacted with instinct, not reason. The shield flew upward, grinding against wolf fangs. The beast fell to the ground completely stunned, a slimy strand of saliva hanging from its maw. "Nemeranti!" Orytrix roared defiantly. The second wolf lunged sideways at his arm. His sword moved in response, but too late. Pain like shattered glass lanced through his limb. Fangs shredded the skin of his forearm, grinding into bone with audible splintering. Orytrix howled in agony and drove his shield into the beast's muzzle. The animal let go of his hand and fell to the ground limply. He staggered but remained on his feet. His blood dripped into the leaves. The horse behind him screamed, rearing up, but the wolves weren't interested in him for now. Immediately, another wolf rushed at him with predacious eyes. The beast jumped from the left, jaws opened straight for his throat. Orytrix twisted. The sword shot upward and cut through the air with a whistle. The blade struck the animal in the neck, slicing through muscle and sinew. The wolf collapsed with a strangled growl. 3 wolves, however, had already reached him simultaneous from the front, left, and behind. The first wolf jumped high, fangs aimed again at the throat with murderous intent. The young warrior crouched and thrust his sword upward. The blade pierced the wolf's belly. The animal fell on him. Blood sprayed the moss under him. At the same time, he felt burning heat in his calf. The second wolf had latched onto his leg, its teeth ripping flesh and crushing bone. The third beast, meanwhile, aimed for his side. Instinctively, he twisted, striking the third wolf's head with his shield. The cracking of skull bone echoed, and the animal collapsed, but the one behind still clung to his leg. It tore furiously from side to side. Orytrix staggered, and the sword slipped from his hand. He fell to his knees, tired and out of his mind from the pain. With his last strength, he grabbed a knife from his belt and stabbed it into the animal's neck. Then he collapsed. Terrible, chaotic, and senseless dreams seized him. His subconscious felt it was fighting for its very life. The dreams developed quickly and changed just as quickly. He saw family. He heard things that people had said deep in the past. He saw things that never happened and places that didn't exist. Everything lasted briefly and made little sense. As the dream climaxed, the images accelerated until for a second a clear, blinding light appeared directly before him. The light rays were both awe-inspiring and dreadful. Somewhere behind the light were large eyes and the suggestion of a woman's face. "Rise!" commanded a resonating feminine voice. Chapter 2. Oratrix awoke in the middle of the forest. The sun had clearly moved toward evening. His body was torn, but he felt that he was alive, and perhaps even capable of walking. Oratrix didn't think much about his dream. He was only afraid it was the product of some latent wound or illness that would eventually finish him, even if he survived his current situation. Along with horrible bodily sounds and indescribable pain, he stood up. His horse was long gone. "Luri! Luri!" he desperately shouted into the forest, as if the animal could hear him. Half-consciously, he leaned his hand against a tree. His strength was leaving him. But then something happened that filled his soul with joy. He heard neighing, and Luri appeared behind the slope. Oratrix smiled desperately. "I knew you wouldn't leave me here, you rascal," he said with a smile, as he struggled to climb onto the animal's back. Luri intuitively crouched, and so Oratrix could manage to climb onto the horse. "Sorry, but we're not going back yet," he said, as if the animal could understand him. "We must find something that will help us." And so, they traveled on. Oratrix lay on the horse more than sat, and his alertness wasn't at its best either. However, he didn't want to turn back. Turning back made no sense. There was no going back without a solution to their misery. They passed through the forest, and he still couldn't shake the impression that he was wandering through an ordinary forest, that he was here unnecessarily. Nothing was there, and he would find nothing. After a time that seemed endless, sunset was slowly approaching. Trees passed trees and leaves rustled under hooves. The forest lived its own life and paid no attention to the young man. "We're here for nothing," he thought to himself. He didn't know if he wanted to return with nothing or die on the spot. At that moment, both options seemed equal to him. Actually, it was better to die than to accept that he couldn't help his people. The Teutones were unstoppable. They fought like demons, and their seers knew dark arts that couldn't be mastered except through a life of torment and self-mutilation. The will to live slowly left him, and melancholy was beginning to take hold. But then, finally, he glimpsed something. It was a tree that had a hollow in it. He dismounted and limped toward it. He couldn't believe his own eyes when he saw in the tree's cavity a necklace of triangular fangs, the likes of which he had never seen in his life. Cautiously, he looked around, but there was no one far and wide, just him and this strange tree. He reached out and took the necklace. For a while he examined it and then pulled it over his head. It fit perfectly. He felt pride and strength such as he had never felt in his life. Oratrix walked back to Luri and mounted him with considerably less effort. They headed back. They traveled into the village at dusk. Nemoranti lay in a valley between two rows of pine hills, as if it wanted to hide from the sight of enemies. Houses with thatched roofs were rotting in places, and wooden walls protected against the outside world rather symbolically. The scent of wood and roasted barley mixed with the smell of damp earth and goat dung. When he rode between the houses, people stared at him like a ghost. He was bloodied and his muscles were torn from bites. People were afraid to address him. He commanded incredible respect. He stopped his horse in front of the druid's house. It stood at the edge of the village, with a nearby circle of white stones. The walls were covered with hides and carved runes. Oratrix dismounted, his legs buckling. As he went inside, the sweet smell of herbs immediately hit his nose. Druid Nematavos, old as oak roots, sat on a chair by the hearth. His face was wrinkled. but his eyes were clear. The old man's eyes fixed on the fang necklace around his neck. "Oratrix, you fool. What have you done?" Oratrix removed the fang necklace and placed it on the table of roughly hewn pine. "I found it in the bewitched grove." "I can see that," Nematavos replied. "Power emanates from that necklace. Maybe it will help us," said Oratrix. "Oratrix, these things never work the way one would wish. It would be best if you got rid of it," the druid answered. Oratrix looked at him intently. "You don't know what I went through to obtain this for our tribe." "I think I do," said Nematavos, unbending. Oratrix stood up somewhat offended and took the necklace with him. "Is there anything else you want to tell me, Oratrix?" asked the perceptive old man. Oratrix stopped at the door. Then he turned around. "In the forest I had a dream, and at its end I saw light and two large feminine eyes. They told me to rise." The druid didn't hide his amazement and shook his head in disapproval. "Oratrix, the gods play their own games. No one will get us out of our suffering, only ourselves." The young man fell thoughtfully silent. He felt as if someone had knocked the breath out of him. "Are you saying that face, that woman in my dream, could really have been Cathabadua? This is beyond me, boy. You are young. I'm not in a position to prevent you from your fate, nor do I see into the future. Remember one thing, however. What the gods give you, they take back threefold." Oratrix nodded and walked away. Chapter 3. The Nemeranti tribe lived in fear. Houses once full of laughter were now full of silence. Children didn't go to the riverbank. Women didn't go into the forest to gather herbs. Guards patrolled everywhere, and archers on the walls had their eyes fixed to the east, where mountain ridges darkened. Nevertheless, days flowed by. Oratrix's wounds finally began to heal, mainly thanks to Nematavos, who began affecting him with his healing powers from the moment the young man entered his house. Moreover, his petite, black-haired wife Alia stopped being angry with him because of his expedition to the cursed forest. His father, on the other hand, had no objections to the necklace and was even proud. Objects that carried the favor of the gods were meant for great warriors. Alia did not share this opinion in the least. "Put that necklace away," she said when he was settling into bed covered with bare furs. The firelight spread across the oak beams of their house and cast long shadows. "Why?" he asked. "It makes me feel unwell," she replied. "All right." He yielded and set the necklace aside, though reluctantly. Then they made love. In the night, however, Oratrix had strange dreams once again, at the end of which that blinding radiance appeared. "If you want to meet your fate, find me," said that pale face with penetrating eyes. And temporarily there appeared to Oratrix a tall mountain, on whose summit was a circle of sacred Celtic boulders carved with Celtic symbols. It was a sanctuary, but it breathed an atmosphere of death rather than life. Oratrix woke up breathless and sweaty. He felt his heart pounding in his body. "What's happening?" asked Alia. "Nothing. Just a bad dream," he replied, and tried to sleep again. In the morning, Oratrix was clear. He put on the necklace and set out for Druid Nematavos. "What's wrong with you?" asked Alia when she saw his distorted face. "Nothing. I am just worried," he lied. He felt guilty when he saw that his wife believed it. She approached him and kissed him. "Slow down. You can't save the whole world," she said, and embraced him. "Not the whole world, just us," he wanted to reply. Instead, he kissed Alia on the forehead and set off for Nematavos. Strange smells and scents greeted the young man again as soon as he entered his house. "Greetings, Oratrix," said the druid. "Greetings to you too, Nematavos," he replied. "What brings you today?" he asked. Oratrix described the content of his latest dream. He told him about the goddess who appeared to him again, and about the sanctuary on the mountain. With each of his sentences, The old man sank deeper and deeper into silence and gloom. I know that place. Our ancestors once invoked the favor of the gods there. Oratrix wasted no time. I need you to tell me how to find it. The druid sighed. I promised you I wouldn't interfere with your fate, and I'll keep that promise. But I want you to promise me something too. Oratrix became alert. What should I promise? He asked honestly. That you will remain cautious on your journeys, he said darkly. Oratrix nodded. I promise. That afternoon, Oratrix saddled Luri and departed for the sanctuary. Nematavos had provided him with directions to the abandoned shrine, which he had carefully copied onto his maps. To the villagers, he merely said he was going for a ride, wanting to avoid any interference. The journey to the sanctuary was not easy, but a smile appeared on his face when he glimpsed in the distance the mountain he was unmistakably looking for. Oratrix led Luri along a rather narrow path that wound upward like a serpent slithering toward the sky. As he approached the summit, trees gave way to bare rock, weathered by time and rain. In the rocks, he found carved runes that he could not fully understand, which somewhat frightened him. At the summit, the path opened into a small plateau where stood a circle of 9 boulders covered with moss and lichen. He dismounted and gestured to his horse to stay in place, though this was unnecessary. Luri had become nervous long before they reached the plateau and would probably not have approached the sanctuary even if forced. Oratrix was also afraid, but he entered among the stones and began to look around. He had left his sword and shield with Luri, which he somewhat regretted. In the center of the circle, he waited. He looked around from stone to stone, then up to the sky. The goddess did not speak to him. Only the song of the evening wind echoed, passing through rocky ravines. Minutes dragged like hours. The young man stood thoughtfully and then simply said, I am here. I have come as you asked. Nothing happened. He looked around at the stones, at the rocks around, searching for any sign that he was not alone, but nothing changed. He began to doubt his own mind. Perhaps they were only feverish dreams caused by his wounds. Perhaps it was simply too much for him, and he had lost control of his head. When Oratrix stepped back toward his horse, suddenly a blinding light blazed above him. Luri reared in fear and whinnied, but remained in place. You dare to come without an offering? Came an insulted voice that seemed to spring from all sides, and even within himself. Oratrix's heart pounded with fear, but he tried not to show it. He looked up toward the light, though it hurt, shielding his sight with his hand. Should I spill blood? Oratrix asked half seriously with what confidence he managed to gather. Spare it, the goddess replied. I want to hear from your lips why you have come here, she continued. To protect my people, said Oratrix, tears rushing to his eyes. Why did you call me? He retorted. The goddess fell silent for a moment. Since the dawn of ages, I have watched men who would step into hell itself for a bit of power over other people. They seek our favor, and we sometimes grant it. But you are different. I saw something in you. I chose to heed your inner pleas. But it may not be the way you envision. Tell me, what are you willing to sacrifice for your people? Oratrix did not hesitate. Anything! Suddenly, in his head, he saw images. Images of life. He was in a place he did not know. Everything there was beautiful, white and pure. There were roads unlike any he had ever seen, and buildings so large he did not even know what they were for. He was nailed to a cross. His weight rested on the nails. Thirst caused him agony that made thinking of anything else impossible. Heat fell from the sun on his body, covered in sweat and blood. A man like you dies slowly, the goddess remarked. Anything, he whispered. Kneel, the goddess commanded. He fell to his knees. Swear loyalty to me until the end of your life, she said decisively. I swear. The lights went out. Oratrix collapsed face first from exhaustion. He was unconscious. When he awoke, The sun was setting, and the first stars were visible in the sky. Luri stood faithfully nearby, watching over his master. Oratrix slowly stood up. The feeling that he had done something that could never be undone weighed upon him. He mounted his horse and slowly set off back down. He knew that his fate had just been fulfilled. Chapter 4. Endurance. Oratrix, on Luri's back, headed home along the sunset road. Wind scattered leaves across the autumn landscape. In the distance, above the treetops of bare trees, dark smoke hung. When he understood what it meant, his heart suddenly constricted with fear and his body with anxiety. He felt as if someone had suddenly trapped him in hell, and when he glimpsed Nemeranti in the distance, his heart broke. The wooden palisades that once stood proudly around the village were torn down. Houses once full of life now burned. "No," whispered the disoriented Oratrix, as if part of his being still hadn't processed that what he was seeing was real. He urged Luri down the hill. For safety, he left him waiting before the village. The wooden gates, decorated with carved symbols of ancestors, lay broken on the ground. He entered inside, and his world collapsed. Houses were looted. Bodies of men, women, and children lay chaotically scattered throughout the village. Some were mutilated and beaten. Others burnt just as most of the village by now. Oratrix was in shock and could barely walk. Headless bodies with ripped open bellies. A mother crouched over a dead child with a sword in her back. He walked through what had been his home, and sorrow weighed on his heart. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was his fault. His legs refused to obey, as if someone had cut his tendons. An uncontrolled roar of some man swept through the village, as if he were being tortured. Oratrix jerked. Dread swept through his soul. But at least it helped him come to his senses again. His painfully pounding heart and quickened breath awakened him. He was ready once again to do what was necessary. Almost silently, he crept toward the source of the wails. He stopped at the corner of a partially preserved house and looked over his shoulder. Then he saw it. The house where the Teutones probably tortured an unknown man was now just a crumbling ruin. Its skeleton told a story of violence and fire. Once solid beams were charred and shattered, with occasional holes where walls had once stood. The half-collapsed roof opened the interior to the gray sky full of ash. The entrance to the burned-down house was guarded by 3 men. He couldn't see clearly inside, but someone was being tortured. One of the men was burly, with red hair braided into plaits, and held a 2-handed axe. The second Teuton, the tallest of them, held an enormous hammer in his hand. The third man was of rather average height and was armed only with a sword. Oratrix gathered courage in his heart and headed straight toward them in a defensive stance. He approached with quick steps, with raised shield and sword blade aimed at the Teutones. The men were surprised but paid him no mind. "Another one left here," noted the Teuton with the hammer in ancient Germanic. The others wasted no time and headed straight toward Oratrix. The Teuton with an axe roared and swung it in a wide arc at the presented shield, intending to break through it. To Oratrix's relief, the shield held. The axe's blow to the shield shook Oratrix's entire arm up to the shoulder. His bones cracked with pain, but he endured. Instinctively, he pulled back and thrust his sword forward. The Teuton stepped aside, and so Oratrix's blade tip narrowly missed him. At that moment, the Teuton, armed with a sword, tried to pierce his unprotected side. Oratrix tried to twist in time, but the sword cut through his fur and passed through skin. Blood, hot and salty, began to flow down his side. It was a good attempt, but far from sufficient. Oratrix responded with a whistling sword movement whose tip just cut the Germanic throat. The man gurgled, fingers desperately gripping his neck, and collapsed to the ground. However, Oratrix had no time to watch this, because he immediately had to deflect another attack. The Teuton, with the large hammer aimed to break his neck. Oratrix instinctively crouched. He felt the heavy stone pass him closely and scratch his hair. The weight of the hammer momentarily threw the Teuton off balance, and so a window of opportunity opened for Oratrix. With a swift movement, he deflected another axe attack down to the ground, and with one stroke also pierced the attacker's belly. With the agility of a fox, he then jumped away from the man with the hammer and let the axe wielder die in peace. "So, now it's just us two. Show me what you can do," he said, not caring if he was understood, and aimed his sword at him. The Teuton looked at the burned house. "Gudrun!" he roared, but no one came. However, Oratrix had no intention of testing his luck and attacked first. He made first steps, and then realized what a huge mistake he had made. The overgrown Teuton must have been cleverer than he seemed. The moment Oratrix stepped toward him, he incredibly deftly swung the hammer, which was irrevocably aimed at his left side. The young man at least positioned his shield so that the hammer would hit the iron center, but he knew things were bad. The hammer struck the shield with such force that he involuntarily dropped it. His arm tingled and ached with unimaginable dull pain. The German smiled and began sending one hammer blow after another. Oratrix dodged as best he could. His left arm for a moment hung limply as if paralyzed. He jumped back, dodged, stayed alive, but he couldn't get to the Teuton within sword's reach. And so he did something he didn't want to do. He took a risk. He switched his sword like a spear and hurled it at the muscular man's chest. The Teuton jumped aside, and the sword missed him. But that didn't matter, because Oratrix realized on the go that he was a step away from the two-handed axe of the man he had just killed. He lunged for it and quickly stepped away from the approaching Teuton. The man frowned. Now it was Oratrix who had taken the initiative. With aggressive swings, he forced the man to dodge and take cover. The Teuton retreated under Oratrix's blows, but his eyes still sought opportunity. He dodged as if he didn't know what to do next, until the axe fell beside him. At that moment, when Oratrix leaned forward with the momentum of the attack, the Teuton lunged forward with his knee upward. He hit the young man in the ribs and knocked the breath out of him. Oratrix staggered, but miraculously dodged another strike and managed to pull away to safety. Both men now circled each other breathlessly, both tired, both seeking their opponent's weakness. Sweat ran down his forehead and mixed with dust and blood. He was tired of it. He no longer wanted to continue. Then, however, he got an idea. He let the Teuton attack. Blows fell madly around him, but never ceased for a second, as if the Germanic warrior knew no fatigue. However, Oratrix at one moment deceptively stepped left and immediately also pulled back. The hammer flew past him from left to right, and at that moment, Oratrix cut off his enemy's hands. A roar of pain rang out, but the roar stopped the moment Oratrix cut off his head. The breathless Oratrix stuck the axe in the ground and leaned on it, kneeling. He wiped his sweaty forehead and swayed from side to side. Later, he stood up and went to get his sword and shield. He looked at the ruin of the house where just moments before 3 men had been guarding and where just moments before someone had been screaming in pain. Nothing. Dead silence. As if no one was there. Cautiously, he crossed to the threshold of the half-collapsed door. Immediately from the right, a skinny hand flew out with a dagger and murderous intent. Oratrix hit the hand with his shield with such force that the dagger fell to the ground. Then he pressed the attacker against the burned remains of the wall and with one stroke cut his throat. He stepped back, and the skinny figure fell lifelessly to the ground. It was a woman, a young woman. She wore a wolf's head with bared fangs and a harness of wolfskin that covered her hips and chest. Her right eye was clouded with white. Her left hand gripped a fang of an animal he had never seen in his life. He absolutely didn't know what to think about this. But then he heard a voice and jerked. A witch's apprentice. They can see images of the future. But she probably failed to see this one, said the man tied up in the corner. Meox! Exclaimed Oratrix enthusiastically. Meox was a man of relatively thin build in the middle of his life. He had brown, short, and somewhat thinning hair. I'm glad to see you, boy. I wanted to call for help, but that bitch would have killed me. No worries. "You don't even know how glad I am to see you, friend," he replied. He approached him and with a knife freed his rope-bound limbs. His left hand was bloodied. They had torn out several of his nails. "I see you didn't have it easy with them," Oratrix noted as sensitively as he could. "They wanted to get information about other tribes from me. I told them nothing." "But why didn't she come to help them?" Oratrix continued, thinking aloud. Miox shrugged. "She could have had several reasons. Maybe she thought I would somehow miraculously manage to escape. Maybe she was simply afraid. Maybe she saw how you would kill her there, and maybe she sensed your necklace." Oratrix looked at the jewelry that adorned his neck and felt somewhat ashamed. "Yes," Miox added. "The whole village was talking about your recent expeditions. Where were you anyway?" "That's a long story, Miox. I will suffer enough. Don't worry about that," said the young man with trembling voice. Miox patted him on the shoulder. "That doesn't matter. We don't choose our fate, chieftain." Oratrix's heart was warmed by the old friend's affection, and only then did he fully realize the implications of that sentence. "So, is he dead? My father?" He managed to get out. "Don't doubt it for a second, boy. I am sorry." Oratrix just nodded with his head bowed. "Come, we have to disappear. It's crawling with two-tones here," Miox urged. "I have to go look. At my house," Oratrix managed under enormous strain. "Boy, I already told you. It's not worth it," Miox replied quietly, with glassy eyes. "I have to go there, Miox," the young man said decisively this time. Miox lowered his gaze and simply nodded. Then he went to the body of the young witch. He bent down and picked up the fang she was gripping in her hand. "Now we're both carriers of cursed objects," he said teasingly. The young man only ironically twisted his lips at this bitter comment. They left through the threshold and carefully headed toward Oratrix's house, or what remained of it. Miox examined the fallen two-tones and then took a sword from one of them. "That axe is much more valuable than a sword," Oratrix noted. "Nothing is more valuable than a sword," Miox replied. They crept silently from house to house until they reached the main road that connected the two main gates. From the northeastern side, slowly but steadily came the sound of hoofbeats. "We have to hide," Miox urged. They crawled into a gap between the remains of two houses and listened as the sounds approached them. The worst part was that they couldn't be sure if they hadn't been spotted. And if they weren't the reason why the riders were coming in the first place. The hoofbeats intensified. Oratrix gripped his sword tighter. "Don't even think about it," said Miox. "If they've noticed us, we won't have any other choice anyway," Oratrix whispered. They were almost upon them. One of the riders said something, and Oratrix was already certain they were coming directly for them. The tension escalated. Then the tall horses raced past them at tremendous speed, and it was all over. Both men released a huge breath. Then suddenly, Oratrix stood up. "What are you doing?" asked an increasingly worried Miox. "Luri, my horse is there, damn it." The young man walked directly onto the road, as if he wanted to shout at them. Miox grabbed him with all his strength and pulled him back to the side. "Have you gone mad? Do you want to get us killed?" Oratrix, pressed against the charred wood and staring at the ground, just said, "Sorry." They continued on their way. When he had his house in sight, he felt hell beginning to surround him again, squeezing him, suffocating him, slowly but thoroughly roasting his skin. When they were almost at the skeleton of his house, Miox grabbed his shoulder from behind. "Are you really sure you want to go in there? You cannot learn anything good in that place. You know what I'm telling you?" Oratrix shook off his hand and looked at him. "I have to go in." He entered with fostered courage, but what he saw pierced his defenses easily anyway. In the bedroom, he found a bound, charred, black body. The body of his wife. His legs failed him. Without actively crying, tears flowed down his face in streams. He didn't want to live. He wanted to throw away that cursed necklace that gripped his throat and end his life as revenge against the gods. Which led him to another thought. Thought of the goddess who had promised to help him protect his people. "You deceived me," he said quietly, darkly. Then again, more clearly, "You betrayed me." Meox grabbed his shoulder in genuine condolence, but also added, "We have to go." "You deceived me," Oratrix suddenly roared. Grief drove him from any sanity. "You deceived me! You betrayed me!" He screamed again and again and again while giving in to grief. Meox began pulling him away from the house with all his strength and tried to silence him with his hand. "Oratrix boy, you must be quiet." He tried to appeal to his reason while continuing to lead him outside, but even his voice was not stable. "You deceived me!" he tried to shout through his hand. "You deceived me! You betrayed me!" Thank you for listening to Blood of the Romans. If the story intrigued you, please consider subscribing so you never miss a new video.